Libya, North Africa. One of the most violent and bloody front lines in the Arab Spring. Its ruler, the dictator Muammar Gaddafi, was loathed and feared by many of his people. When they rose up, he hired foreign mercenaries to crush the revolution.
Gaddafi was a strange personality. Ruthless, isolated, single-minded, and positively dangerous.
But they failed. And when Gaddafi was captured and killed, the mercenaries found themselves abandoned.
Terrifying, terrifying, and you'll be bloody lucky if you're not tortured and shot.
This is the story of what happens when men who are willing to fight for money end up on the losing side, alone and facing a terrifying fate.
It's war. It's war. You just want to live.
Come to Libya to find out why Gaddafi relied so heavily on foreign mercenaries and what happened to them after he was killed.
Gaddafi had mad money, and with mad money you can buy serious firepower.
He will meet men on both sides of a conflict which is still influencing events across North Africa. And find out why Gaddafi failed to stay in power.
Gaddafi came to power when he deposed the aging King Idris.
Libya, 1969. A group of army officers led by the then Captain Gaddafi seized power in a bloodless coup. Muammar Gaddafi ruled Libya with an iron fist for 42 years. The country's massive oil reserves allowed him to fund ambitious projects at home and abroad. He looked after friends and family with lavish rewards, brutally punished anyone who opposed him. He funded his allies abroad, and Libya soon became a pariah state, a supporter and training base for international terrorism. He was even the target of an assassination attempt by Ronald Reagan in 1986.
Yesterday, pilots of the air and naval forces of the United States spoke to the outlaw Libyan regime in the only language that Colonel Gaddafi seems to understand.
One of his adopted daughters was allegedly killed and his palace destroyed, but Gaddafi escaped. At the beginning of the 21st century, crippled by sanctions and low oil prices, Gaddafi promised to reform.
After 9/11, Gaddafi realized that this was his moment. Western countries, particularly America and Britain and Libya, suddenly had something in common. They were both fighting the jihadis.
Keen to claim some success in the war on terror, Western leaders like Tony Blair took him at his word and began courting him.
Gaddafi was a strange personality, ruthless, isolated, single-minded, and positively dangerous. It has been said that there were two sides to Gaddafi, both of them nasty.
In 2010, peaceful protests known as the Arab Spring erupted across the Middle East and North Africa, as long-suppressed people sought to overthrow their corrupt and tyrannical leaders. In just a few months, the peoples of Tunisia and Egypt both managed to overthrow their long-standing dictators, inspiring other populations in the Middle East. When protests started in eastern Libya, Gaddafi was determined not to let them spread. He responded with violent rhetoric, promising to crush anyone who dared to oppose him.
Those infidels who are attempting to burn down our country to the ground, we should have no mercy on them.
The protests started in Benghazi. Men and women took to the streets in open opposition to their tyrannical leader, who denounced them as drug addicts and fanatics.
In the first days of the revolution in February 2011, people came out on the streets in rebellion. And these were peaceful protests. And the regime unleashed mercenaries. Now, those mercenaries were very distinctive because not only were they black, but also they wore these yellow hard hats. And so people knew who they were.
Gaddafi paid immigrant workers to put down the protests. Mostly black African labourers, these men became known as the Yellow Hats. Untrained and undisciplined, they fired indiscriminately into the crowds.
In the case of Libya, there were guys running around being mercenaries who were black Africans and with, I don't think, any training at all. They just decided, you know, this is an easy way to make some money, and let's go and fight.
But rather than intimidate the protesters, this just brought more out onto the streets, many of them now armed. Gaddafi sent in mercenaries, along with 3 brigades of soldiers, one led by his son. The uprising was now an insurgency, with 10,000 people on the streets willing to fight Gaddafi's regime. Gaddafi vowed revenge.
سنزحف أنا والملايين لتطهير ليبيا شبر شبر، بيت بيت، دار دار، زنقة زنقة، فرد فرد، حتى تطهر البلد من الدنس والإرجاس.
As it looked like a massacre was about to take place, NATO enforced a no-fly zone. Encouraged by the NATO support, protesters swarmed across the city, and Gaddafi's army began to defect and desert. Benghazi erupted in celebration as Gaddafi monuments were toppled. The city was now free. During the fighting, 50 mercenaries had been killed and 236 captured. 15 were hanged outside the Benghazi courthouse, and 1 was beheaded.
There were many black Africans in Libya who were there working in hospitals or on construction sites. There's a lot of racism in Libya. A lot of lighter-coloured Libyans really look down on Africans, be they black Libyans or Africans from other parts of the continent.
Gaddafi's use of black mercenaries combined with latent racism would soon have horrific consequences.
As the story of mercenaries spread, people started to accuse any black person of being a mercenary. If you were a black man, then the rebels would say, you're a mercenary. That wasn't necessarily true. Right at the beginning of the revolution in Benghazi, the black African who was said to be a mercenary, who knows if he was really a mercenary or if he was just one of the migrant workers who'd come in, he was strung up from the courthouse, he was hanged. And what was most disturbing about this scene was that people were filming it on their mobile phones and they were jeering and cheering.
Gaddafi's popularity had waned as his reign dragged on for decades. Deeply paranoid, even before the Arab Spring, he increasingly turned to foreign mercenaries for what he thought would be loyal support.
Gaddafi needed a neutral force with which to respond to an internal attack, such as the one that he received from the Benghazi rebels. He needed to have units on which he could depend, which had no tribal loyalties, and which were not going to plot against him.
Gaddafi knew that many of the people on the northern seaboard despised him. They saw him as uncultured because he was a Bedouin. And so he cultivated the Tuareg and other black African Libyans, for example, the people who lived in a town called Tuareg just outside Misrata. They were given privileges to some extent, they were given subsidies, and many of them were incorporated into the military.
Gaddafi had links to the Tuareg, nomadic tribesmen who had lived along Libya's borders for decades. With no allegiance to any state, they were the perfect force whose loyalty he could buy.
Gaddafi liked the Tuaregs, they're good fighters, and he employed them in order to make up a good part of his army to protect his southern flanks. If you look at the reason for using outside people, you can see that he played his hand very carefully.
It wasn't just the Tuaregs Gaddafi hired. He also hired mercenaries directly from neighbouring countries' armies. Mostly black Africans, the decision to fight for Gaddafi would have awful consequences.
Now, someone like Gaddafi's got a lot of money, he's got a lot of oil. It's a hugely oil-rich nation and no friends. So you buy friends. And that equates to mercenaries and forces that were sort of lent to him or hired out to him from some of the other African nations to the south.
I think no matter how bad your cause would be, you'd find some bunch of guys somewhere that would be ready to do it. Whether it be any good or not, it's another matter.
Gaddafi had spent billions of Libya's vast oil wealth on the latest weapons and technology. To maintain and operate this equipment, he needed a specialist workforce. For this, he brought in Eastern Bloc mercenaries.
Gaddafi had purchased an awful lot of high-tech equipment. His Navy, Army and Air Force was supplied with fairly well up-to-date equipment. He needed to have that equipment serviced and used effectively. In other words, he brought in people to fly his aeroplanes in the early stages, but especially people to mend them.
Well, in recent years, all over Africa, you find Ukrainian helicopter pilots. And yes, in Libya as well, because most of the sub-Saharan African mercenaries don't have the skills and the training to fly helicopters. My understanding was that they had been flying sorties for Gaddafi, certainly before the no-fly zone was imposed. And I think that he used Ukrainians and others from Eastern Europe because they had those skills.
If the money's right, then you can get people to do just about anything. And I'm sure loads of the Eastern Europeans would have been tempted into being actually mercenaries for more money if that was on offer, actually fighting.
So the rebels found themselves up against foreign mercenaries and a vast array of advanced weaponry. Armed with only rifles and limited supplies that could be smuggled in from other Arab Spring countries, the rebels were forced to improvise. They relied on homemade and scavenged weaponry. Their main asset was a fleet of Toyota pickup trucks, commercial jeeps with weapons mounted. They had been a staple of low-fi rebel armies for decades and became known as technicals.
And what happens, you strap a weapon to it, like this sort of anti-aircraft gun, a massive machine gun, and it becomes a technical. It's a fearsome, very mobile, very fast piece of machinery.
The technical takes its name from Somalia, where organisations would pay locals to protect them with technical assistance grants. The Chad-Libyan conflict of 1987 employed so many technicals on both sides that it became known as the Toyota War.
The fight here in Libya was driven literally by this type of vehicle. Locals using these, an army of Hilux trucks with brave men and serious firepower heading towards a bank of mercenaries dead set on stopping them.
The rebels had one other factor in their favour. They weren't just fighting for money. They were fighting for their very lives and homeland. The rebels knew exactly what Gaddafi was capable of and knew there would be no room for surrender. After the rebel victory in Benghazi, they were keen to push the revolution forward. Their next target was Zawiya. Taking it would mean closing in on Gaddafi and cutting off a vital supply route.
Well, Zawiya was important because there was an oil refinery there and there was a port. And as I understand it, the oil refinery kept going. I think that the real issue is not so much Zawiya in itself, but the fact that the space which Gaddafi and his people had to move in was just narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. Having said that, the key issue was the NATO bombing. I have no doubt that it was the NATO bombing that was the death knell for the Gaddafi regime.
As in Benghazi, Zawiya quickly fell into rebel hands as conscripted government soldiers deserted and defected. But Gaddafi was not going to surrender so easily, and the city saw some of the bloodiest fighting of the revolution. A counter-offensive was launched, besieging Zawiya with government forces, mercenaries and snipers. Protesters gathered in a mosque for an anti-government sit-in. Gaddafi's forces opened fire with anti-aircraft guns. Justin meets some of the men who were there.
المسجد هو طبعا رمز من رمز ثورة 17 فبراير كان كل الثوار في المسجد يعني كانوا حامين المسجد كل الثوار فيه فحاول هو يقضي على حاجة هذه اسمها ثورة 17 فبراير فيمسح هذا المكان حتى لا تكون فيه ثورة 17 تنجح ثورة 17 فبراير.
Surely Gaddafi's loyalists were following Islam and therefore would be insulted by the destruction of a sacred site.
طبعا قوات عسكرية تابعة للقذافي وما كانوش مثلا اليوم سلطة يرجعوا فيني طبعا نشق عليه وفيني ما نشقش عليه يعني فحقيقة هذا الأمر يعني بقوة يعني الأمر هذا يعني خلاهم أنهم يديروا الأمر هذا أمر قوة السلاح وقوة كذا خلاهم أنهم يديروا الأمر هذا خوف يعني خوف على أنفسهم يعني.
The city was brutally fought over for days, with control swinging from rebels to Gaddafi's loyalists and back again. When rebels entered the city for the second time, they faced a new problem. Gaddafi had brought in mercenary snipers.
I'd heard that there was a sniper in the corner here in the square.
كان موجود في المبنى الذي هو خلفنا. هذا يعتبر مبنى إداري لفندق الجوهرة. القناص الذي كان متواجداً قبضنا عليه بعد تحرير ليبيا. هذا القناص كان جنسية تونسية وكان يحمل جنسية ليبية. يتنفس برئة واحدة كانت الأحداث طازقة. كانت أمور هي أمور مادية وكانت إن المرتزقة كان يوهمهم النظام السابق بإعطائهم جنسية ليبية وأعطاهم تمليك في ليبيا وغير ذلك. إن أي إنسان غير ليبي ليس له مصلحة في الخوض في معركة سوى التحرير أو الحفاظ على النظام السابق. هذا يدل على أنه هو تدخل في حرمة الآخرين.
Justin meets a family that know the impact of well-trained mercenary snipers and the pride of having a martyred son.
Assalamu alaikum.
هذا my son. لماذا؟ أنا عن نفسي
This is Ahmed, his cousin.
His name Ahmed.
His name is Ahmed. Killed by Chadian sniper.
Mercenary sniper.
يعني هي أحياناً تكون المشاعر مختلطة. ده هي مجموعة من المشاعر المتناقضة اللي مرات الإنسان نفسه ما يقدرش يتعامل معها. مشاعر صدمة، على مشاعر أحياناً فرح، على مشاعر إحساس بفقدان شخص عزيز عليك. يعني مشاعر صعب إني نوصفها لكن هي مشاعر ألم، مشاعر حرقة. أكيد.
This is my son. Some of the martyrs who participated in the revolution.
معظمهم مات يعني.
Most of them are killed.
Most of them killed. Yeah. لما جدار فنالوت my son.
Despite these losses and the formidable pro-Gaddafi forces, the rebels were able to push the loyalists out of Zawiya. Not only had they secured another decisive victory, they had cut off the source of Gaddafi's wealth. Despite the revolution closing in on him, Gaddafi again appeared on state TV, raging defiance. With Zawiya won, the rebels could now focus on Tripoli. With Benghazi, Zawiya and other major towns falling to the rebels, Gaddafi and his forces are cornered in the Libyan capital, Tripoli. On the 20th of August, rebels launched Operation Mermaid Dawn, the push for Tripoli. Justin heads there to talk to rebel soldiers who faced Gaddafi, what remained of his army, and the mercenaries he had hired in a desperate bid to retain power.
Hadi, my fixer here, has arranged for me to meet with one of the rebels involved in the battle for Tripoli. I'm really keen to find out how it was to fight against such a mighty force, to fight against the mercenaries and the loyalists. We're on the outskirts of the city, and this is where some of the most brutal fighting took place.
As the rebels approached Tripoli, they cleared the surrounding villages street by street.
This is Muad, this is Shaban, this is Justin.
He and Justin drive east along one of the roads leading from the desert into Tripoli. There were 4 such roads, and the rebels had to seize them before they had any chance of taking the capital.
بحيث ان كنا احنا متشوقين لطرابلس، كانت الملحمه كانت مثلا 4 محاور، كنا والحمد لله من او واحد من المحاور. المحور كنا فيه كان محور مهم جدا، هو المحور الجنوبي. كان هذا المحور مهم تأمين المطار حتى لا يهرب القذافي وأعوانه من هذا المطار.
We heard that it wasn't just the loyalist army but also international mercenaries.
عندي علم. صرت واحد روسي، صرت في طريق المطار سنايبر من جنسية روسية.
And while the mercenaries fought for money, the rebels were motivated by something far more powerful.
دافع قلت لك في السبب الأول، دافع هو أن الشهادة. احنا كمسلمين ندور في الشهادة ندفع في الفلوس الخسارة، الشهادة هذه ندور فيها، جتنا حديث عندنا. والدافع الثاني رد الظلم والعدوان من قبل الطاغية، رديناها عليه والحمد لله وفقنا الله. كان هم الدافعين هم اللي خلوني نطلع بدون ما نفكر.
Gaddafi knew this was the end game. With many of the men he was relying on just being guns for hire, how long would they stay and fight? Already, scores of his own army were deserting or switching sides.
Explain to me the battle. What's really important about this area?
النقطة هذه تمثل أنها كانت نقطة شبه بداية للوصول إلى طرابلس، وكان فيها وصول تحرير طرابلس بالكامل من فلول القذافي، من الأزلام، من مرتزقته اللي جابها من مالي، نيجر، تشاد.
Did you encounter the mercenaries? Did you know of the mercenaries?
والله شو بنقول لك، القناصين كانوا من الروس، كانوا في طريق المطار في عمارات مرتفعة. كنا نشبحوا في العائلات يجونا، كانوا سنايبر يبعتونا في عائلات نقبلوا فيهم. احنا أول ما نقبلوا يضربوا فينا، نلقوا صديقي طاح، صديق فهمت، ما نعرفوش منين جيت. لأن عندنا أهالي غاديكاي في تريبولي، أهالي في ليبيا، في طرابلس في عندنا أهالي، عندنا بنات خايفين مرتزقة. وكان القذافي يستخدم في عملية الاغتصاب، تم المال منه يلجأ لي يقول له اغتصب، فهمت هيك. عندنا أخوت غاديكاي وبنات زوايا.
How do you feel about these mercenaries that fight just for money?
الناس هذه ما عندهاش هدف، ما عندهاش. اللي يحارب خاطر المال بيكون قلبه ضعيف، مش شجاع، مستحيل حيكون شجاع بقدر ان احنا نحاربوا لان الحريه.
What became apparent was that they did not really have any great loyalty to the Gaddafi regime. So when things began to get bad, they were not going to hang around to the bitter end.
Anyone on that battlefield would be there because they had a passionate commitment to being there. In a way, if you've got a really passionate commitment to something and you've got an AK-47, that makes you kind of a dangerous person. That's the fundamental thing about mercenaries. If you're doing it for money, it's your job, and nobody wants to be killed on the job. Quite often, unless they're really incompetent in the case, they want to try and get away at the end of the day. If you're a fanatic, die-hard fanatic with an AK-47 and a couple of grenades, you don't want to get away at the end of the day. You just want to kill as many people as you can and then go out yourself.
You've got a contract, you've got an employer. It's like any other job. And you've got a price. And as with any other job, there comes a certain point at which you'll say, I'll do that, however, I won't put myself in this amount of danger. Now, if you're a rebel, you live there. It's your town that they're shelling. And Gaddafi had raised the stakes. Let's not forget, when he sent that radio broadcast saying, we are coming for you tonight, we're coming for you in your homes. I mean, that was an ultimatum. And if you're on the rebel side, you have no choice but to fight at that stage. There is no, I'm not doing this anymore. There is no price, there is no contract. You will fight until you die. And that's not a language that the mercenary knows.
In Libya's capital, Tripoli, Justin Hall is following the path the rebels took in taking back their country from Colonel Gaddafi. By the 22nd of August, 6 months into the civil war, the city had almost fallen. A victory that would serve as a knockout blow.
Tripoli was the seat of Gaddafi's power. So everybody knew that when Tripoli fell, everything was lost. It was like Berlin to Hitler. Gaddafi knew that he had to defend Tripoli, and the day that he failed to defend Tripoli and his forces failed to defend Tripoli, then the game was over.
Over 3 days, rebel forces fought their way into Tripoli, squeezing Gaddafi and his forces towards the ultimate target, the Bab al-Azia palace, Gaddafi's home, fortress and centre of operations. The surrounding streets make it clear what a savage battle it was. It was so well defended, the rebels believed that Gaddafi was still inside.
So tell me about this place.
This is Bab al-Azizia. It's mixed between a residential house of Gaddafi, and he's operating his daily life from here as well.
Bab al-Azia is an enormous complex covering 6 square kilometres. Part Playboy Palace, part army barracks. It's the quintessential dictator's fortress. But it also served another purpose.
It also was the nerve centre of his personalised government. He had an underground bomb-proof setup there, because there was the intelligence bureau of the leader.
The rebels came up against heavy and constant gunfire and wall after wall of defences. Bab al-Azia had been strengthened systematically over the years by a paranoid Gaddafi.
The rebels were risking life and limb, but not for a buck. No one was getting paid. They were doing it for freedom, and that, I think, gave them a tangible advantage. If you're fighting for your life, you're going to go all out, and that's exactly what the rebels did. And the mercenaries disappeared into the distance.
The rebels had the momentum, and it seemed like they couldn't be stopped.
I think the moment when Libyans really knew that it was over was when the rebels got to the golden statue, the golden fist holding the American jet fighter. And then they climbed on it, they waved their flag, they screamed, they shouted. They had their photographs taken. They all took pictures of each other with their mobile phones. It was a modern revolution, and they had won.
Destroyed, then looted for treasure, Bab al-Azia is a place that Libyans now hold in such disdain that it's become the local dump.
This is the remnants of Gaddafi's palace at Bab al-Azia. The rebels, in order to really take control, had to take the palace. It was a formidable target, 6-kilometre perimeter, fortified. It sort of represented everything that was wrong to Libyans.
With Tripoli in rebel hands, they began erasing signs of Gaddafi's rule from the capital.
What's this place, Hadi?
This is Gaddafi's house.
Gutted and scourged, the rebels had reached their objective, but they still hadn't found Gaddafi. Bab al-Azia contained a network of secret tunnels, and once again, he had slipped away.
They stormed the palace, and Gaddafi wasn't here. Gaddafi had somehow escaped. You know, there's stories of him, with his golden gun getting onto the golf cart, and, there was secret tunnels that might have taken him out, but he wasn't here.
In the beginning, he drove south to the desert, and then he showed up in Sirte.
Gaddafi had escaped to his hometown of Sirte. So the rebels poured in after him.
People were surrounding him in Sirte. To his west, the Misratan militias were around. People wanted to persuade him to leave. I think the idea was that he would dash off to the south towards Niger. Someone saw his motorcade leaving Sirte.
The trucks were bombed by NATO planes, destroying most of the vehicles.
We know, of course, that it was shot up and he escaped from his car and went down a storm drain. The Misrata militia found him there.
A grenade attack left him with head wounds before he was dragged out, beaten and humiliated. These images were beamed around the world. Gaddafi was dead, and the rebels would seize power. But what would happen to the mercenaries he had hired? They were now alone in a foreign country, and suddenly without any support.
I'm Libyan like you.
In Tripoli, with Gaddafi dead, the rebels go house to house, rounding up all remaining loyalists and suspected mercenaries. With no single policy for prisoners, each militia was free to administer justice however they saw fit. With the head of the regime gone, recriminations will filter down through the loyalist ranks.
Terrifying, and you'll be bloody lucky if you're not tortured and shot. And that's where being a mercenary, is a very different story from being a soldier with a cat badge on. Because, you're going to be a prisoner of war, and hopefully you're going to be treated reasonably well. But if you're a mercenary and the other side get hold of you, you are in deep trouble.
With Gaddafi gone, the mercenaries he had hired found themselves in a terrifying alone, and hated by the new rulers of the country. They seemed doomed.
Some were undoubtedly there when Tripoli fell and were killed or captured, but a lot of them, because they felt no intrinsic loyalty to Gaddafi, tried to flee or fled.
It was getting towards the end when it was defeat that was on the wall. And a friend of mine got a phone call in the middle of the night. He's a pilot, being begged by the guys, come and get us. We're in deep shit here. And we've got an awful lot of cash. Come up and you'll get the cash, but you've got to get us out. And he actually turned it down.
This footage allegedly shows the desperate escape back to the borders of Tunisia, Chad, Niger, and Sudan.
The Chadian mercenaries, who formed an important group, of course decided that they ought to retreat to the south. When Tripoli fell, a block was put on movement from the north of Libya on the southern route at Seba, and a lot of people got stuck in Seba for a long time. Now, they were either migrant workers who were trying to get back to their country, or they were Chadian mercenaries, as we're supposed to believe, on their way back. How on earth do we distinguish between those?
Those who couldn't run had no option but to try and blend in to the hordes of migrants trying to return home.
When the mercenaries removed their uniforms and tried to meld in with the civilian population, that made an extremely difficult problem for the militias who were at this time trying to capture them.
The rebels started rounding up those they believed had sided with Gaddafi. But there were nearly 2 million black African workers in Libya, and suddenly they were all suspected of being mercenaries. Those captured tried desperately to claim their innocence.
I think the dangers of being a mercenary, or even being perceived as a mercenary, was shown by what happened in Libya. There were a number, not a huge number, of sub-Saharan Africans who were fighting on behalf of the Gaddafi regime. Now were in fact in training camps in Libya, members of various guerrilla groups who had ended up in Libya, but they're the ones who got caught up when the uprising began in Libya, and they were used by the regime to supplement its own forces.
problem was that, of course, there were a lot of migrant workers around at the same time. Chad and Niger had supplied the great bulk of migrant workers. They're also a group of black Libyans. How do you know whether one man in civilian clothes was an ex-mercenary or a person who worked for one of the oil companies in the past?
The rebel militias had free rein to administer justice, and the fate of their prisoners looked bleak.
This is what Gaddafi brings to us. I don't know Gaddafi.
For these captured dark-skinned men fleeing to the border, they could have little hope of a fair trial. The rebels didn't need much evidence in order to condemn them as mercenaries. And with numerous weapons and stashes of gold, their fate was sealed. White Eastern Europeans who had remained in Libya would fare no better. Accounts of Eastern Bloc mercenaries bolstering the Gaddafi ranks were rife among the militias.
Where are you guys from? How long have you been here? And where'd you come?
These Serbians captured trying to flee Libya will struggle to find unbiased judgment.
Do you watch the news?
Sometimes I watch, but...
Do you know that Libya's been at war for 6 months?
Yes.
But you came to Libya to work on roads?
They tell us it's okay.
So you weren't caught as a sniper?
No.
The notion of white mercenaries working for Gaddafi would create huge media interest and eventually help secure their release. But the thousands of black Africans still claiming their innocence would not be so lucky. Justin has been allowed exclusive access to one of the alleged mercenaries, a man in a desperate and hopeless situation.
Just arrived at one of the many prisons in Libya that house mercenaries captured during the revolution.
I'm here to understand what drives people from other countries to fight for cash. You know, were you involved in the fighting?
Okay. Look, there is many men from outside, from other countries, come here to fight.
So lots of different people joining the force from different countries.
Yeah.
So which countries?
Like Chad, like Sudan, like Egypt, like Somalia.
Did you receive any money to do what you were doing to fight?
It's war. It's war. They are like, they have power. You know what's the power? Power, gun, everything, beating, kill. You just want to live your life. You live with your family. You work, you know?
I
You
appreciate
don't want to fight or do anything wrong. No, you just want to live.
We heard of a lot of people in the last moments of the uprising here that Gaddafi was spending a lot of money to buy in powerful forces.
I don't see anything about this, you know?
You're from these different countries.
Yeah.
And you're motivated by what? To come here and fight someone else's battle?
I'm not come here. I'm born here.
You're born here?
Yeah, in Zawiya City.
Okay. Okay. What's the charges against you?
Did you have a gun? Did you steal or kill or fight or...
How long do you expect to be here? How long is your sentence? Have you been tried? So there's a sentence against you, or you're waiting for trial?
I'm waiting.
Waiting?
Yeah.
And you've been waiting 9 months?
Maybe 9 years. You don't know.
Okay.
God, no.
Good luck. Looking at that character, you're not exactly going to think he's a crack commando mercenary. General sort of thought of what a mercenary might be. He's just a young kid, pretty terrified,
Okay, he's accused of being a mercenary. He's certainly not going to turn around and say that he is, but if you think about it, you know, all of the people that are drawn in from around the area, from Chad, from Somalia, you know, locally in Africa, and all of those brought in from Europe, from Belarus, from Russia, from Ukraine, etc. They're all fighting for cash. Is it worth it? Is it worth it?
The mercenaries in Libya fought to begin with because they thought Gaddafi would win. That was all they'd ever known. But then gradually over time, they realised that they were on the losing side and they started to give up. And I think that also some of them wondered if they were going to get paid. Because if you're fighting on the losing side, then obviously you're not going to get paid. So what's the point?
Despite the billions Colonel Gaddafi spent on maintaining his power, the uprising had succeeded. Nearly 8,000 men are now imprisoned in Libya by both government and militia forces, many accused of being mercenaries.
Those men are still being held, and they're being held in extremely bad conditions, and many of them are being tortured. And we have no idea how or when they will ever be released. And this is something which casts a great shadow over the Libyan revolution.
For the Tuareg, nationless mercenaries who also fought for Gaddafi, this was just the beginning. Returning to northern Mali, they took up arms in pursuit of their own country. Eventually the French and their foreign legion were deployed to stabilise the situation. The after effect of the 6-month Libyan civil war will be felt for years to come. In the wake of Gaddafi, a power vacuum has emerged, and the Libyan people are still a long way from the government they crave. In the lawlessness that persists, Libya's arms stockpiles are flooding across its borders, fueling further wars and creating more work for future mercenaries, willing to fight anyone